I want to start by showing you a video that happens to be pinned on my Twitter file, on my Twitter profile, So just sit back and watch this edit I put together. You've probably seen it before if you've ever watched my...
lose on Tuesday. And if they lose bad, Trump and the Republicans lose on Tuesday. And if they lose badly, it's not going to be because of the left, whatever that means. It's not because of the 50 Antifa black mask guys who roam around the United States breaking windows and committing mayhem, most of whom are probably paid police informers.
I love that the protesters are screaming Antifa when the guy has a Trump bumper sticker on the back of his helmet. First of all, there's so much wrong with this. First of all, why is that guy wearing a helmet? Second of all, why does he have a Trump bumper sticker on the back of the helmet? It's just so suspicious. So suspicious. I can't believe. And this is just like protester filmed footage from the day of the event. And then, of course, a violent MAGA terrorist with a red hat is going to step in and do something about this Antifa guy, quote unquote. So that right there is what I would call a narrative breaker, because the footage in that clip is counter to everything that you have heard in the corporate media. Now, I used to use the term mainstream media, and I think it was Glenn Greenwald and Dave Smith who were talking about how the quote-unquote mainstream media is not the mainstream media anymore. It's the corporate media. The mainstream media is this. The mainstream media is social media. The mainstream media is TikTok, Twitter, dare I say Facebook, probably the most censored of all of those, and Instagram. But they're all censored. Twitter, and you're lying to yourself if you don't think Twitter and TikTok are censored. I mean, I think Dore was kicked off TikTok, so was Glenn Greenwald. Anyway, not going to use the mainstream media term anymore. I'm going to use the accurate term corporate media. But I wanted to set that up with that clip because a recent thing happened that a lot of people did not catch, or wasn't widely reported anyway. And just take a look at this headline here. U.S. Supreme Court raises bar for obstruction charge against Trump and January 6 rioters. And this is from June 29th, so yesterday. The U.S. Supreme Court raised the legal bar on Friday for prosecutors pursuing obstruction charges. So what does that mean? Well, we're about to find out. And there's just a couple little interesting takeaways from this that you should know about. So let's just read this real quick. Washington, June 28th, Reuters. The U.S. Supreme Court raised the legal bar Friday for prosecutors pursuing obstruction charges in the federal election case against Donald Trump. Excuse me. And defendants involved in the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. Sorry for that pause. I had to kind of enlarge my view a little bit here. The justices ruled 6-3 to throw out a lower court's decision that had allowed a charge of corruptly obstructing an official proceeding. Congressional certification of President Joe Biden's 2020 victory over Trump that the rioters tried to block against defendant Joseph Fisher, a former police officer. So to break this down, basically what they were trying to do is they were trying to say that the protesters on January 6th were obstructing the certification of the vote, which is reaching, to put it lightly. But let's keep going. And the guy who opposed it was a former police officer. So, I mean, that's the kind of pushback, obviously, it takes to get anywhere with these types of cases. But this next paragraph has a real interesting part to it. So, the court in the decision authored by Chief Justice John Roberts took a narrow view of the obstruction statute, saying that prosecutors must show that a defendant impaired the availability of integrity of documents or other records related to an official proceeding or attempted to do so. So that is actually a good decision that the Supreme Court made. What they're saying is you can't just blame these people or accuse them of trying to stop the election or mess with the election results when all they did was enter the building. There's no proof that they like tried to get into where the votes were being counted or anything like that. So this is clearly a pretty hyped up charge, as you know, it's kind of already showed you. But Roberts was joined by fellow conservative justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, as well as liberal judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Jackson. It's like a combination of action and Jackson. That's what happens when you get me before I've finished at least 2 cups of coffee. But let's keep going. Roberts rejected the Justice Department's more expansive reading of what constitutes obstruction, calling it a novel interpretation that would criminalize a broad swath of prosaic conduct, exposing activists and lobbyists alike to decades in prison. So that right there, the lobbyists part, is probably why they came down on the side they did. They're like, oh, we can't criminalize lobbyists. What would we do if lobbyists couldn't get into Congress to bribe our representatives? So conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote a dissent joined by liberal justices Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. Fisher had challenged the obstruction charge which federal prosecutors brought against him and hundreds of others, including Trump, in January 6 related cases. So it's so crazy. Like you look at these details and you're just like, this is such a completely manufactured. Anyway, let me keep going here. The lower court was directed to reconsider the matter in light of Friday's ruling. The ruling was a potential boost for Trump, the Republican candidate challenging Biden, a Democrat, in the November 5th U.S. election. Trump was hit with 2 obstruction-related charges as part of a 4-count criminal indictment in a case brought last year by special counsel Jack Smith. The crime falls under the 2002 Sarbanes-Oxley Act, a federal law passed after the accounting fraud scandal at now defunct energy company Enron. So they're using SOX to go after Trump. It's crazy because I've had to deal with SOX. I used to work for a company and we had to be SOX compliant with development stuff for anything that we are taking money on because we ran, online ads. So the idea that this is now being used to prosecute political dissent is completely nuts. It's being twisted, and this is actually a big win for legal, for the rule of law, actually, because like the dissenters or the Roberts and the people who the majority were saying, if the court had come down on the other side, basically you could be arrested for trying to interfere with the election if you went in the Capitol. They could accuse you of trying to interfere at any time. And it's a public building. It's our building. It's a taxpayer-funded public building. So that's, on its face, is ridiculous. Federal prosecutors have accused Trump of pressuring government officials to overturn the 2020 election results and encouraging his supporters to march to the Capitol on January 6th to push Congress not to certify Biden's victory. Now, I have a screenshot somewhere of Trump's tweet from that day. I'm going to see if I can find it, but let me keep reading that. So it could push Congress not to. Based on false claims of widespread voting fraud, on the day Congress met to certify the results, Trump supporters stormed the Capitol, broke through barricades, attacked police officers, vandalized the building, and forced lawmakers and others to flee for safety. We're going to go into the weeds on that in just a minute, but Trump and his allies also devised a plan to use false electors from key states to thwart certification. So that's the part I'm a little hazy on. I wonder what the evidence of that is, but I don't doubt it, I guess. Actually, I do kind of doubt it because these people are well-documented liars. George Washington University Law School professor Randall Eliason, a former federal prosecutor, said Smith might not be deterred from pursuing obstruction charges against Trump despite the new higher bar. The court recognizes that submitting false evidence could still violate the statute, so it seems like with the fake electors scheme, the charges should still survive. Eliason, yay! The Supreme Court is expected on Monday to issue its ruling on Trump's bid for immunity from prosecution in the federal election subversion case. Trump has pleaded not guilty. So big day for the January 6th case, and the Supreme Court actually kind of coming down on the side of rational thought in at least this case. They're definitely way off base on a bunch of other stuff. So I wanted to go deeper into this with you because a lot of stuff happened since this, and I wanted to start by kind of re-showing you one of the reasons I think our good friend Mr. Carlson got thrown off Fox News. Let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? And revisit a simpler time.
These are the pictures you've seen of January 6th. They're familiar because they've been playing on a loop on every media outlet in America for the last 2 years. There's a reason for that. But it turns out there's quite a bit of video you haven't seen. And that video tells a very different story about what happened on January 6th. More than 40,000 hours of surveillance footage from in and around the Capitol have been withheld from the public. And once you see the video, you'll understand why. Taken as a whole, the video record does not support the claim that January 6th was an insurrection. In fact, it demolishes that claim.
Now, I've said this before. There's clearly people that did illegal things, like the guy I played at the beginning of this segment, and those people should suffer consequences. If you vandalized, if you broke windows, if the people that broke into Pelosi's office or whatever, any of those people should definitely, they're all on camera. So they should be able to be prosecuted for the stuff they did. But let's keep going.
And that's exactly why the Democratic Party and its allies in the media prevented you from seeing it. By controlling the images you were allowed to view from January 6th, they controlled how the public understood that day. They could lie about what happened, and you would never know the difference. Those lies had a purpose. They created a pretext for a federal crackdown on opponents of the Uniparty in Washington.
Our office wanted to ensure that there was shock and awe, that we could charge as many people as possible.
The first thing you notice from viewing the full video record of January 6th...
Just watching this again is just... It's what I used to love about The Daily Show is he would kind of go back and touch on this stuff and take you down memory lane a little bit. I mean, they had to be a lot quicker about it. Here, we can really go into this stuff instead of just showing sound bites, but...
is just how many people entered the Capitol building that day. Hundreds and hundreds of people, possibly thousands, over the course of about 2 hours. The crowd was enormous. A small percentage of them were hooligans. They committed vandalism. You've seen their pictures again and again. But the overwhelming majority weren't. They were peaceful, they were orderly and meek. These were not insurrectionists, they were sightseers. Footage from inside the Capitol overturns the story you've heard about January 6th. Protesters queue up in neat little lines. They give each other tours outside the Speaker's office. They take cheerful selfies and they smile. They're not destroying the Capitol. They obviously revere the Capitol. They're there because they believe the election was stolen from them. They believe in the system. Here's the man you've heard referred to as the QAnon shaman outside the Senate chamber. These are not rioters. These are people who wandered over from a political rally.
We will not let them silence your voices.
After the rally, they walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, where organizers had secured a federal permit to hold a legal rally on the grounds of the Capitol.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Once at the Capitol building, things
Peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. That sounds so violent. It really sounds like he's inciting an insurrection there, doesn't it?
began to get chaotic. Capitol police officers fired tear gas into the crowd. A few at the front of the herd broke windows. Someone opened the doors, and many hundreds of others just walked in.
We're going to make that the story.
Of course, they did make it the story. And at the center of it, the single most famous person arrested that day was a Navy veteran from Arizona called Jacob Chansley.
Alex Jones.
You haven't
Alex
seen.
Jones was there saying they're going to make that the story. Don't do anything crazy because they're going to make that the story. And of course, they made that the story. After this aired, there was a response to Tucker Carlson by Congress. Chuck Schumer literally came out and went, "Oh, Tucker Carlson is the biggest racist, Russian, anti-vax, Nazi, anti-gay, whatever you need in history." And he literally, Schumer called for Fox to fire Tucker Carlson, and eventually they did. But watch this clip. This is just mind-blowing.
Should be presented to the public. In free countries, governments do not lie about protests as a pretext to gain more power for themselves. They don't selectively edit videos for propaganda services and then lie about them in fake hearings and show trials. But that's exactly what happened. And every member of Congress should ask why that happened. But Democrats in the Senate, the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, is not asking why. Instead, Chuck Schumer went on the Senate floor today to explode and to say that showing that video, evidence of wrongdoing by the federal government, including the security forces, the police department that Nancy Pelosi personally controlled, letting the public see any of that is a threat to democracy. Watch.
Last night, millions of Americans tuned in to one of the most shameful hours we have ever seen on cable television. Fox News host Tucker Carlson ran a lengthy segment last night arguing the January 6th Capitol attack was not a violent insurrection. I don't think I've ever seen a primetime cable news anchor manipulate his viewers the way Mr. Carlson did last night. I don't think I've ever seen an anchor treat the American people and American democracy with such disdain.
There's
What's
nothing
your name, scumbag?
that shameful that has ever appeared on American television in the history of the medium. And so, on the basis of that, the self-evident outrage of showing the public video that it paid for and has a right to see, Chuck Schumer called for the censorship of that video. Any information, and he did not dispute that it was accurate, that damages a storyline his party constructed and used must be squelched. And Schumer was explicit on that point. Because that video contradicted lies told by the Democratic Party, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, Chuck Schumer demanded that our bosses pull this show off the air.
And eventually they did. And it is crazy to me how quickly this has flipped, because I came from the Iraq War era and I watched this happen to the left, to anti-war people, and journalists in the early 2000s during the Bush administration. And now it's the same people who a lot of the same, state employees, the Nicole Wallace's, George W. Bush's former press secretary, has a show on MSNBC. Joe Scarborough, a former Republican senator, has a show on MSNBC. Bill Kristol and David Frum, the thought leaders that promoted the biggest American foreign policy mistake in history, are regular commentators on MSNBC. So the whole thing has just completely flipped, and Trump has kind of enabled that. I think when I look back on the last 20 years, and I've probably said this before, but it's like we all voted for Obama because he did not vote for the Iraq War. That's how he beat Hillary Clinton in that primary. That was like a poison if you had voted for the Iraq War. And so Obama beat Hillary because of that. And then he got in and he went right to just pink washing and green washing and, the war machine, and spent years. And, I didn't see it while it was happening because during that era, I had young kids and I was busy working and I voted for Obama. So I was probably one of the people calling his detractors racist, to be honest. And forgive me for that. I was busy with my head down trying to feed my children at that time. Now, obviously, I have a little more free time to do shit like this and bitch about it. But it doesn't change the fact that the whole partisan thing has completely flipped on its head. And now it's actually the Democrats who are the quote unquote fascists, the people that, are censoring and pushing new wars. And, they just dress it up in the most shallow, fake virtue signals and get away with it, And listen, I'm all for progress. I would consider myself an actual progressive. Things should get better as we move forward. I mean, if you're not growing, you're dying. That's just the nature of things. So progress is important, and I think the term progressive has been demonized. But anyway, because all the neocons have moved into the Democratic Party, and language, oh my God, the Orwellian nature of language, the way that when you watch TV now, they just repeat these phrases. It's like if you watched, I did a piece a couple weeks ago on the news after Trump was prosecuted for 34 felony counts. And you could just watch every other sentence these guys would say, convicted felon, convict. Now that Trump's a convicted felon, well, this is unprecedented. We've never had a convicted felon, convicted felon, convicted felon. So they very easily, like, unprovoked invasion was another one. The clearly provoked invasion was branded in the press as anyway. Let me let Tucker finish here, and then I got something else to show you.
He's going to come back tonight with another segment. Fox News should tell him not to. Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, tell Carlson not to run a second segment of lies. I urge Fox.
Okay. If it was lies, why would he be so adamant that they not run another segment? I'm taking another sidebar here. I think that most liberal-minded people are well-meaning people. All right. Like, I don't think that Democrats, like the vast majority of Democrats, they do the things that they do because they think that it's the right thing to do. So when someone like Tucker Carlson, who they've been brain trained to think is an evil racist, white supremacist, anti-vax, all the bad things that liberals have been doggy trained to react to, when he says stuff like this, they're just like, oh no, well, it must not be true because Tucker Carlson has been, etched into my brain as something he's not. Let's get back to this.
Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, tell Carlson not to run a second segment of lies. I urge Fox News to order Carlson to cease propagating the big lie on his network and to level with their viewers about the truth.
Every accusation is a confession with these people. Cease propagating the big lie. We know what the big lie is in this situation, Chucky.
The truth behind the efforts to mislead the public. Conduct like theirs is just asking for another January 6th to happen.
It's a threat to democracy. Pull him off the air. A couple of obvious observations. You don't often see the Senate Majority Leader openly call for censorship on the floor of the Senate, as if that was totally normal and didn't contradict the spirit and the letter of the First Amendment. But of course it does. But what's really happening here, what you're seeing is hysteria, the overstatement, the crazed hyperbole, the red in the face anger. What is that? Well, it's not outrage. Of course, it's fear. It's panic. Those videos, which we did not retouch, which we brought to you after running everyone by the Capitol Police to make certain that we didn't imperil anybody, we told you that last night. Those videos touch a nerve because they're a threat to the lies that Chuck Schumer has been telling for the last 26 months. And not just Chuck Schumer. We should also tell you that.
Now, I think after the gaslighting leading up to the debate the other night, a lot of people who didn't before are starting to see this dynamic. I think just a quick reminder, just bringing the receipts to the table right here. The New York Times, the committee hired a TV executive to produce the hearings. So they carefully selected footage, I'm sure, and they wrote a goddamn narrative, okay? It has brought on a veteran TV executive, James Goldston, to produce the hearings. For almost a year, the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol has been painstakingly collecting interviews with 1,000 witnesses and producing over 140,000 documents. So, scoop, January 6th committee's secret advisor, James Goldston, former TV news chief, helps the January 6th committee. NPR, a former TV news executive, is producing the January 6th hearings. So this is well documented that they literally hired a Hollywood producer to craft a narrative around this event. And again, people that did illegal stuff should face consequences. If you broke windows, if you vandalized, you deserve what you get, you know. But most people at this event did not do anything wrong. And they constructed a narrative clearly to hang around the neck of the former president, who they are, for some reason, fighting tooth and nail to keep away from getting back into the White House. So anyway, I want to close this out by Candace Owens was on Jimmy Dore, and she actually lives in DC, and she has a lot of just kind of like icing for this cake right here. So listen to what Candace had to say.
So do you think that I was actually shocked to see Bill Maher say why ain't they charging him with the real crime of January 6th?
Bill, think a minute.
How do you think that? So I think that most of the country is now, I mean, when Vivek Ramaswamy said it at that Republican debate that was an FBI inside job. Do you think that so what's your feeling? Is that
Kurt makes a great point here.
What's your sense? Do you think most of the country is, meaning 51%? Do you think that a majority of Americans are starting to realize that? Because that's what it was.
I think it's going to still take some time for people that were on the far left to accept that reality. I mean, I was saying from day one, you're just not. I lived in DC a couple of blocks from where.
I hate the characterization of MSNBC brunch liberals as the far left. Let me just get that out of the way right there. Those people are not the far left. They've been duped into thinking they're on the left by a bunch of neocons who now run the Democratic Party.
Where this went down. There is a camera on every corner. You just are not going to ever make me believe that they dropped off pipe bombs outside of the DNC and the RNC and they just can't catch this guy. Meanwhile, they were catching grandmas who.
That is such a great point. We live in such a security state. If you did anything, there are satellite cameras. Everyone has a phone. The technology is there, especially in a place like DC. You have to believe that it's just completely covered with surveillance and all kinds of like tech security stuff. You have to believe it, especially the way that Silicon Valley, kind of runs things now. I mean, you would be silly to think otherwise with Google and Facebook and the iPhone and all that stuff. I mean, they wield a lot of power. So that technology has integrated Amazon, come on. that technology is integrated with the government. So I guarantee you, to Candace's point, I don't live in DC, but I guarantee you there are cameras everywhere and microphones and whatever you need, surveillance everywhere.
Within 10 feet of the Capitol building and bringing them in and arresting them. So it very much was very obvious to me that it was an inside job. And I think they have been so severely propagandized because of every day they were just talking to them saying, like, we almost lost the country. It was an insurrection. I mean, I had family members that were messaging me asking me if I was okay. And it was bonkers. I have to tell you this because what people forget. So I
recently, my son graduated, and one of the speakers at his graduation mentioned the insurrection. So people still fully believe that it was like these people almost overtook the most powerful military in the world.
could have used those texts the entire summer when Black Lives Matter was burning down Washington, D.C. I mean, they were just, you'd walk outside, they were breaking into cars, breaking into apartments. They were boarding up, places where people worked, places of worship. I mean, the place was on fire. You couldn't hear a single sound on the day of the Capitol, and yet they were showing images to make it seem like Washington, D.C. was under siege. So that sort of a stuff, it really works. People's minds get programmed, and it's hard for them to accept that what the media told them and what they believed they watched just wasn't so, that it was a small picture of something else. So I think obviously people that supported Trump from the beginning know that it's crap, but I still think that there are too many people who believe what Bill Maher believes. And listen, they're having their ideas reinforced when he says it. Hey, why didn't we get them for January 6th? Why didn't we get Donald Trump? Full derangement.
Thank you, Governor Cuomo, for setting everyone's.
So there it is from someone who lives in DC. And I mean, I was skeptical of this. This whole thing was a big narrative breaker for me because I knew people, indie, bloggers and stuff at the time. I wasn't even doing this stream back then, but I knew people who were at that event, who were filming and posting video on Twitter. So I knew that it wasn't the way that they said it was. And I remember at the time I was working for this company and I was on a remote call that day with some people from Europe. And I probably told this story before, but I think it's so funny because one of the women on my call was in France. She's a French woman. So we were talking about the events that had happened, the storming of the Capitol and stuff. And this is what the French lady said. She goes, it reminds me a lot of the Yellow Vests, only they didn't do anything. So the French lady was like, yeah, American protesters are pussies, basically. And again, I think it's good that the court ruled the way it did because it's a win for everyone, really. It's a win for the right and the left, for protesters, because if they had been able to say, oh, people who go into the Capitol to protest, or people who go on, this is public property, this is our property, are somehow impeding the government's function or something, they could use that on everyone. And so I'm sure that the spin on this, I haven't seen anyone mention it in the press yet, really. Like I haven't looked really hard, to be honest, but everybody's so busy talking about Thursday night's train wreck that this kind of stuff, all these Supreme Court results, like I said earlier, they just had a result that they can criminalize homeless people now. So, I mean, we are just slowly inching, like this is one of those rare positive things I wanted to highlight because everything else is just inching in the completely wrong direction for us.